Hi, welcome to Gladverse TV. I'm Laura Borland, your host. And on Gladverse TV, the silver lining is always our North Star. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that is very near and dear to me. It's about bouncing back from sexual assault. It is very common, not only among women, but also men who tend to hold that inside and not speak about it. And today, I have two qualified, wonderful women to tell us a little bit more and drive our discussion with regards to bouncing back from sexual assault. Our first is Zelna Oberholtzer. She's an author, life coach, speaker, mother, serial entrepreneur like myself, and community builder with a special interest in the development of young women, using her journey of a multiple rape survivor to a life of thriving to inspire. Besides being an active speaker in different forums, she runs support groups for the depressed, abused women and children, and cancer groups. And our next guest is Dr. Alisa Jarrud. She is a clinical assistant professor of psychology in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania and the host of the Anxiety Savvy podcast. I definitely have to check that out because I tend to run on the anxiety spectrum. And she's the founder of the Art and Science of Emotions, LLC, which is her private practice in the Philadelphia area. Dr. Jarrud specializes in treating anxiety-related disorders and emotional regulation difficulties using highly effective, empirically supported cognitive behavioral treatments. And specifically, she's an expert in exposure-based treatments for anxiety disorders, including prolonged exposure therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder and exposure and response prevention therapy for obsessive-compulsive disorder. In addition, Dr. Jarrud specializes in dialectical behavior therapy, skills training, which includes skills in mindfulness, my favorite, emotion regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness. And she enjoys working with parents in particular to help them utilize these skills in their parenting. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this esteemed panel. All right, so Zelna, you mentioned in your bio that you were a victim of multiple rapes. Can you just share a little bit about that, like the time frame when that happened?
All right. So in the 70s, you didn't know a lot about molestation. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Okay, sorry. So I was 3.5, almost 4 when it happened the first time by an adult man, my mother's boyfriend. And it continued with different men, older men, all of them, I might add, and I know this is not political, but all of them were white males that has raped me until the age of 16. So in total, 7 different men, but different occasions, different, sometimes in their houses, sometimes in the car, sometimes they would look after me and take me out to on excursions and so forth.
That is so powerful, what you're sharing. What was the impact of, what protective mechanisms did you implement during that time?
Sorry. Do you want to finish the question?
I thought I did. All right, let me rephrase that. Were there protective mechanisms that you found yourself doing in order to process what was happening with you?
So as a small child, obviously you're not sure what is happening to you. All you know is that it didn't feel right. It was sore. It hurt a lot. There was a lot of bleeding. And the fact that they threatened me like they would hurt my parents or my mother and my sister, because my father died shortly before this started happening. He passed away, so my mother started seeing other men. And it was basically just trying to protect my family, because I felt like I had to do whatever they wanted in order to protect my mother and my sister.
That's really powerful what you're saying, because I'm a 2-time rape survivor, and that happened within 6 months of the day of each other when I was 14.
Sure.
And the first time was by someone who I knew well, and the second time I was held up. And each of those presents very different reactions from me. With the person who I knew, I thought it was I had brought that on to myself. And when I was held up, it was pretty much that same kind of threatening situation. Like, oh, if you say anything, I'm going to kill you. If you, everything was about this underlying threat. So the fear element was also in place. And I was fortunate in the sense that my high school principal, I went to an all girls Catholic school, and my high school principal, she was a nun, and she took me under her wing. And what she did was that for any other girls that she knew of on campus who had gone through a similar experience, she would ask me to speak with them. And it was through the conversation and the dialogue and speaking about it every time and sharing my story that made it a little easier for me to process. But it made me afraid of men for a very long time. I mean, when your first experiences are that of a sexual assault, it changes your perspective and your worldview. So, yeah.
Sorry, I think in my case, it wasn't so much making me afraid of men. It made me want to challenge authority the whole time. It's like I didn't care about them. I would challenge them in every single situation. And when I saw anybody abusing their power in some sort, I would be the child that my mother always had to... No, she didn't give me hidings, but I had to be punished a lot of times because of the way I spoke to the older, especially men. And right through my life, I don't get on well in corporates because I always challenge the leadership when I start seeing abuse and so forth. So yeah, I think it's not always the fear of of other men. It's like the reaction you have to them, because automatically when you see them, and you have to check yourself the whole time, because now that you're an adult and you understand that you don't judge and that you don't want to just attack. Or I literally, I don't know, it's like I get so mad that I just want to walk out of the room. I don't even want to listen to what they say sometimes.
That's powerful. And Dr. Alisa, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I think what both of you are experiencing is very typical in the wake of a sexual assault. And it's really common afterward to fear men if the abuser, if the perpetrator is a male. And it's also common, I think, to, as you're saying, Zelna, to mistrust men, to dislike them in the wake of a trauma, even a sexual assault, even if it's not fear necessarily. And one of the things that I don't know how much you want me to say here, but I'll just add that, I think what determines to what extent those reactions last and continue, the fear or the distrust, I think is often about our behavior, how, if at all, we change our behavior in following a sexual assault. So those who avoid men for the rest of their life never get a chance to learn that, hey, there are actually some good guys out there who don't want to abuse their power, who don't want to hurt anyone. But those who continue to interact with men and meet men who are who don't fit that mold, oftentimes are able to move past those beliefs.
That's very powerful what you're saying, Dr. Alisa. That is definitely a strong takeaway from that there's no cookie cutter way or approach. And I will share something with you too. With the recent wake of this Me Too movement, I realized that I didn't know a woman who did not have, where she was like, telling a guy to just like, don't touch me, like, don't touch. I had been through that experience so often. There were so many microaggressions, like throughout childhood, even before those sexual assaults took place, where you felt like you were fighting men off. And, I'm glad there's a name put to it. And you often wondered, what it was causing these, a lot of time these men to feel that they could encroach on your personal space, to feel like they could, touch you as if you were property. And just understanding that a lot of women were in a fight mode for a long time, where you had to kind of just, get hands off of you, to just go, look, do not do that. And to then, be told that we're like in our heads, right? That we're making this stuff up, or we're just exaggerating what's actually happening. But this is real. This is real. Dr. Alisa, do you have any statistics or anything that you can share with regards to sexual assault?
How frequent it is?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think numbers vary. I think you said 1 in 2. I think I've more often heard 1 in 4, but I haven't looked at numbers.
Yeah, there were some years back when I was teaching. I remember the number was like 1 in 4 before the age of 15 for women, and 1 in 3 throughout the course of their lifetime. And the numbers for men at the time were thought to be 1 in 5. But men are conditioned to never speak about it, right? It's a no-no. And even if it happened with, let's say, an older woman or something like that, it's considered a badge of honor versus that
should
being.
Be. That's what the men say. It should be considered a badge of honor. Imagine.
Yeah. But, they're taking impressionable boys and, having their way with them, or, forcing them into precarious situations. Zelna, is there something else you'd like to share? Like, what was your moment of forgiveness?
I think, sure, it's been a very long road and a long journey for me, and I've tried everything. I've gone through many psychologists, gynecologists that had to fix a lot of the physical stuff, battling to fall pregnant and all the aftermaths of the actual rapes. And then, of course, also then fighting off being abused, because you go into abusive relationships and it becomes a cycle until the day that and I've tried to commit suicide on so many different occasions and failed, that I felt I'm not even good enough at this. I'm not even good enough at killing myself. And I had a friend who gave me a choice and said, look, this is the closest you've come so far in getting it right. So I want to give you a choice. I want you to take my hand and we fight this together. But you have to be all in or you're all out. You have to make the decision. And my daughter I think she was about 7 at the time. And I thought how I would feel if my mother was the one doing this the whole time. And she almost constantly had to play mother to me. And that was not fair on her. So I wanted to become the mother that she deserved. And I knew that I have to start putting things in place and look deeply into what has happened. Some of the events were so deeply hidden inside me that hypnotherapy also didn't help. And I went through different types of healers, holistic healers. And finally, I found an intuitive healer and a kinesiologist that helped me deal with that. And then I could continue with a psychologist. But then the forgiveness started in realizing my stepfather was an alcoholic, and that is a disease, just like depression is a disease. And if I wanted my daughter to forgive me, I probably have to start forgiving too, because other people have mental illnesses like pedophilia. I'm not sure if it is classified as a mental illness, but perhaps I should be softer on my perpetrators. And I then started, digging deep, very deep. Sometimes I actually wrote a book. My book is called Napierville, about the railway suburb in which I grew up in. And sometimes when I wrote that book, I felt so vulnerable and so in the moment again, that I didn't want to forgive. And I thought they don't deserve to forgive or to be forgiven. And especially when I started sharing little bits of my story on social media, and other girls in the suburb and boys in my suburb started saying, you know what, that uncle who lived next door to you, he did it to me. And a lot of people started saying it. And then I felt responsible, because had I only spoken when I was a little child, if I had spoken up because I was the eldest of the group of people who has come forward, then I could have prevented him from doing it to them, and I didn't. So then it is about forgiveness for yourself as well. And that is probably the hardest. Forgiving the perpetrator, I mean, because let's face it, it's like 4 decades ago in my life. And I have grown, and I have had an amazingly interesting life because of because of the default that I used to go to. I've had an interesting and very varied life because I tried out everything. I had no fear when I grew up, because I think I've gone through the worst. And apparently I haven't, because some of my clients' stories just, blows my mind that anybody can survive that. But they do. And that's the other thing, is everybody has got a story, and everybody's story is valid. The one thing that came up in one of the support groups was somebody came to the group, but she wasn't sure that she really belonged there. And she said, I'm not sure whether I am abused enough to be here. And it really, like, it made me so emotional, because very often we think we should compare ourselves, even in abuse, we should compare ourselves and ask, maybe I am not, maybe that person deserves treatment more than I do, or whatever. And coming back to the forgiveness part, if we can't forgive ourselves for things that we have done as a consequence of the abuse, because we're not angels, we all have our own faults and our own mistakes, but we always tend to blame it on our abuse. And when we stop doing that, and I always ask this to cancer patients, I ask them, if cancer did not happen to you, what would you do today differently? Because it's very easy to say, but cancer ruined my life because of X, Y, Z. But actually, if you think about it, okay, I can't say as a child that my life would have been extremely different, because I grew up in a poor neighborhood and poverty circumstances. But more because of that, I wanted to get out of there, where a lot of people want to remain. That's all they know. I just knew that I knew inside me there was a voice that said, you are destined for far greater things than this, and you're going to make a difference in the world. And I couldn't have gotten to that step if I did not forgive myself for the wrong choices that I have made. And even if it is just taking my daughter into an abusive relationship with another man, and her viewing it, her seeing what happened inside those relationships, instead of walking out, remaining there. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that I deal with, they remain in the relationships. I think the stat says, the TS Foundation in any way says 7 times a woman might go back to the man who abuses her, because there is love, and there is almost an addiction sometimes, because they make you so small and you believe you are that small and you can only be something in their world. And exposing my daughter to that has actually made her stronger in her choice of relationships. But I felt guilty for so long, and I've apologized so many times to her. And she says, Ma, please just relax. It's really okay. I'm okay. What happened, and it just taught me to be on the lookout for certain behaviors inside men.
And that's one of the silver linings of what you just shared, is that your daughter has made better choices, right? Yes. That was the exposure she needed in order to go, okay, I'm not doing this. This is not going to be my life. But I really am struck by the power of your resiliency. And frankly, your openness with such a personal story, for sure. Dr. Jarrud, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, well, your question was about forgiveness. And what I will say, I don't think forgiveness is always necessary. I think it's okay to not necessarily forgive the person who sexually assaulted you. I think what might be most important is forgiving yourself right? Because oftentimes sexual assault survivors blame themselves for the fact that it happened, or for the fact that they struggled in the wake, like after the sexual assault. They might blame other people in their life for not being more supportive. And I think that's the forgiveness that I tend to really try to help people with. Some people choose to forgive their perpetrator or perpetrators, but I don't think that is like a critical step necessarily to being able to heal and move on.
Yeah. Well, when I mentioned forgiveness, I really meant about like, if you chose to forgive the perpetrator, I mean, more power to you. For me, the forgiveness had to come from me. I struggled with insecurity issues for a long time. I had the facade of being very confident, but inside I was, a frightened child. And, I wondered what it was about me that caused these things to happen. And, it was just one of those strange things, like as a child, as a teenager, when somebody asked, someone to describe me, they go, "Oh, Laura, the tall, sexy girl." Like sexy was always like a term that men used to describe me. And I was wondering what was considered that. What aura was I presenting, right? And so I had to come to terms with understanding how I was viewed. And to know, Laura, it's not you, it's them. And learning to, again, show that forgiveness for myself, but then also the love to myself was very difficult, because by nature, we're taught to be selfless. We are supposed to give to everybody else. Taking care of you is selfish, vain, conceited, wrong, boastful. And so I've been having a challenge recently in terms of, when I'm patting myself on the back, to feel the genuineness of that. It feels forced sometimes, but I'm getting better. And so I think the same is true for anyone who's been through a sexual assault, is really understanding that it is okay to pat yourself on the back. Doing so helps you to heal in your own way. Write yourself a little, like every day in my journaling, I write a moment I'm proud of myself for. What did I do that stretched me, that showed the awesomeness of me, the value that I bring to the world? And so by adding that ritual into my journaling practice, I've found that I do look out for those moments when I'm like, look, I showed up today. And I met these awesome women today who shared their stories, and I'm going to learn something about how best to handle a situation from some vignette that each of you shared. And so I understand the value of taking care of me and that mindfulness. And I know, Dr. Alisa, you focus on mindfulness as a practice. Is there a mindfulness exercise you can give our viewers as a takeaway?
Yeah, well, would it be okay if I shift a bit gears? Yeah, just one thing I want to say if we're wrapping up before we do. I think mindfulness can certainly be really useful. And for people who might be after a sexual assault, might be struggling with things like nightmares, intrusive, distressing images, or flashbacks, which are really common. Maybe people who are finding it hard to get back to their old way of living. They're avoiding things that remind them of what happened, or avoiding places that now seem less safe because of the sexual assault. I just want to also put out there that I don't think mindfulness in and of itself would be sufficient there. So I want to note that there are evidence-based treatments that can be really effective in treating those types of reactions, what often we would call post-traumatic stress disorder. So you mentioned in my bio, I specialize in prolonged exposure therapy for PTSD. There's also something called cognitive processing therapy for PTSD. So if those reactions are continuing to linger, and you're looking for some additional help to move through those so that those symptoms aren't controlling your everyday, that's a place that I would encourage people to look, to seek out treatment. in terms of mindfulness practices, I like to think of mindfulness. Sometimes when people think of mindfulness, they think of it as this thing they have to carve out 30 minutes out of their day to lock themselves in a quiet room and close their eyes. And really, mindfulness is about coming to the present moment, not dwelling in the past, not focusing on the future. And it can be done in bite-sized, like just in minutes, or seconds even. You can take a mindful sip of coffee where you're really actually paying attention to what the coffee cup feels like in your hand and noticing what it feels like as it goes into your mouth and you swallow it. Same thing, just, noticing the sunrise in the morning and just taking a minute to notice that, or to notice the sounds of the leaves rustling in the wind. So that's what I would say with mindfulness. Just really wake up and notice the things around you, because there are so many, despite whatever difficulties might be there as well, whatever stressors, there are also many moments of beauty.
I love that. And you mentioned something that I really had completely forgotten about, that I had after sexual assaults for years. I suffered with severe panic disorder with agoraphobia. And so I just didn't want to go outside. Like if anything deviated from that routine, full on panic attack. Like every day when I lived in New York, every day I was on the train, I had a panic attack. Dead of winter, just complete sweat, meltdown, the whole 9 yards. And it was difficult to move through that, and just realizing that a lot of that had to do with all of those suppressed feelings from all those years back. And, part of that letting go thing that Zelna mentioned, right, where she tried so many different types of therapies until she found the right one for her. It's so vitally important, because that's where I think most of us feel stuck, is what everyone else says is working just isn't working for you. So you must be flawed. Mm-hmm. And so, but I think you have to, I'm putting on my quality engineer hat. When you're doing quality measurements, right, and you're doing quality control, one of the things you have to do is to ensure that you have a limited number of processes in place, right? And you test and see what works. And then you substitute something else and you see if that works, until you come up with the right solution for you. Yeah. And I think that's where we, as sexual assault survivors, we have to find out what is right for us. Mm-hmm. It's the custom blueprint for all of us. So some of the mindfulness techniques won't work for everyone. Taking that sip of coffee, you might be a tea drinker and you find that, that's not going to happen, right? Some people like the outdoors. I walk every morning, but that is what I do to clear my mind, right? Some people are evening people. Some people just, enjoy that quiet moment. Some people function better with just listening to music in the background. Whatever it is, just don't be afraid to try different things until you find it, because it's out there. I believe that there is a solution for everything that's out there. And Zelna, I would love for you to close out for us.
All right. So for me, gratitude is a great, I want to say almost a help, or like a walking stick sometimes, because I do suffer from depression and I am medicated and I do practice mindfulness, but some days I also have an autoimmune disease, lupus, system, I can't pronounce it, SLE is all I say. So some mornings it is really hard to get out of bed. But then I remember I did wake up this morning, and that I am alive. And with lupus, there's no guarantee that you will wake up alive. You probably won't wake up if you did, but anyway. My mind is all over the show. But so for me, my gratitude starts some days when it is really, really hard to find something to be grateful for. My husband and I have got a ritual where we try and find at least 3 things that we are grateful for during, like, at the start of the day and at the end of the day. And we set an intention for the day, what we want to achieve. Some days for me, it would really be just to get out of bed. And if I've done that, it's amazing.
Yeah, you've won the day.
Because sometimes my body is, in a lot of pain, and taking a shower, convincing my brain to to help me to go into the shower and actually physically take the shower and put on lipstick, because I believe my mother taught me this, that if you put on red lipstick, the whole world will smile with you. But I tried that and the world didn't smile with me. But it helps. It does make you look better. And when you look better, you start feeling better. But yeah, so gratitude is a huge thing, and setting an intention for the day, whether it is just to have breakfast, to eat, to get something into my body, and to be grateful for that. And I'm grateful for everybody it takes to produce that bowl of cereal or apple or whatever it is that I am eating. And grounding and telling the universe that, you know what, I'm in this life and I need for today, to survive in this life, I need good health. And I usually always feel better after that. And, you know, when the small little victories start, then it becomes more livable. But yes, so it's a ongoing thing. Most days are amazing these days, but there are times, about 3 weeks ago, it was really a bad time for me. But then you get up and you continue again. And most of my clients anyway understand that when I do have a lupus flare up, I will text them and ask, you know, can we postpone meetings? I did at the beginning try to continue with the meetings, and it was just a really bad idea, because they'd end up crying from my behalf, and I felt depressed. That was when I just started out, but I've learned from those mistakes. Yes, and then finding humor. And I have 6 dogs, 4 spaniels and 2 German shepherds, and the love I get from them is that just makes, you know, everything better for me.
Yeah. So another thing I think that's important to know is just that about 50% of individuals who experience a sexual assault will go on to develop something called post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. And just about everyone in the first few days and weeks after a sexual assault will have symptoms of PTSD. And what we know kind of determines there's usually this natural recovery period in about the first 12 weeks after a sexual assault. And for those who in that 12-week period start to get back to their normal daily lives, they start going back to work, hanging out with friends, approaching reminders of the assault, maybe even allowing themselves to think about it or talk about it with friends, supportive loved ones. Those are the people who tend to recover naturally, whose symptoms tend to decline with time. And it's those who understandably, you know, want to avoid and continue avoiding things that remind them of what happened, continue avoiding the memory. Those are the ones who tend to go on and develop post-traumatic stress disorder. And so for those who might be, you know, struggling with those symptoms right now, again, the evidence-based treatments that I mentioned earlier, those are really designed to help people break that habit of avoiding those reminders, so that they can reclaim their lives and process what happened to them, gain new perspective, new meaning about what happened and what it means to them now and moving forward. So I just wanted to add that in too.
No, I appreciate that. That is something I did not know. And that's something for any of our viewers who currently going through, you know, within that new period following a sexual assault, this is really critical information for them to know. So I really appreciate you sharing that, Dr. Alisa. I think, well, new news for us, right? Right, Zelna?
Dr. Alisa, could you maybe just expand on what the symptoms are of post-traumatic stress? Because often people don't know that they are suffering from it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are 4 clusters of symptoms. There are re-experiencing symptoms, which include things like nightmares, intrusive, distressing memories, flashbacks, you know, feeling intensely emotionally upset or having intense physical reactions when reminded of the sexual assault. There's also avoidance, so trying to avoid the memory, right, thinking about what happened, avoiding people, places, situations, or activities that remind you of what happened. And then there are changes in cognitions and mood, like so changes in our thoughts, how we view the world and other people and ourselves, and changes in our mood, right? Maybe feeling more kind of just down and negative, feeling like it's hard to connect with others or feel strong, positive emotions. And then there are also changes in arousal and reactivity. So this is where we see difficulty sleeping, difficulties falling or staying asleep, difficulty concentrating, maybe being more easily startled or jumpy, and also being more on guard. So for people, who've been sexually assaulted, maybe when they're out in public, they're always looking behind their shoulder to make sure nobody's following them. Sometimes also some risky behaviors can be there as well. It's a great question.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Answering it.
Yeah, I think I experienced quite a number of those that you mentioned at some point or another. So
risky behavior, definitely.
All right, guys, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.